Welcome to the DIY Goalie podcast, where hosts and goalie coaches Nathan Park and Connor Monday share their insights on how to become a better goalie. Welcome back, goalies, to another edition of the DIY Goalie podcast with your hosts Connor Monday and Nathan Park. And today we are super excited because we do kind of look at the analytics and stuff for the podcast, but sometimes it's like, oh, are these just a bunch of bots, or are people just clicking start for 5 seconds and then leaving? So we're excited because in the span of probably 2 days, we had Hiroki Wakabayashi reach out from episode 16 and said that there was somebody that reached out to him who had heard our episode, our interview with him, and picked his brain a little bit on how to implement a development plan for their minor hockey program in their small Canadian town. And so he reached out and said thanks for that. And so that's kind of cool. And then the other thing is that we did get a listener question that we are going to tackle today. So we appreciate the fact that you guys are out there and actually listening to us, and taking some of this stuff to heart and acting on it and engaging it. So that makes us pretty excited. So thanks to all of you guys listening and taking what we say and implementing it to help make the world a better place for goalies. So thanks for that. Connor, how are you doing? And then you can maybe segue us into the listener question that we will tackle today.
Yeah, absolutely. First off, just a massive thank you to all of our listeners and subscribers and everybody who follows us on our social media platforms. It's you don't really think about it during the time, right? Like we do this for fun, and kind of we're just another voice in the goalie community, and the fact that there are people out there that are listening to what we have to say and listening to the banter between us, even though it goes absolutely nowhere half the time. It is pretty cool to see. And then, like, when you take a step back and you think about it, and you're like, wow, there are actual real life people that are out there listening to us and reaching out to Hiroki. And then, like, this listener question that we have here for a second, it's pretty wild to think about. Other than that, I'm doing fine. I am very tired this morning because as of recording this, we had our 7:15 session out in Ardrossan in the greater Edmonton area. So that was fun. And yeah, it's going to be a good week. I'm very, 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 very excited for all that. Nathan, I know that your son had minor hockey this morning, and so we've been out for a bit, and we're still grinding away here, but it's been a fun time. Leading into kind of my segment for today, it's kind of been taken over today. We do have our very first listener question, so we want to give a shout out to Greg Marion. I apologize if I maybe butchered your name there, but he submits a really interesting question, and I think it's one that you and I have had conversations about in the car, after practices, on the phone, on date night, and it's one that I think we've talked about in previous episodes, but I like the way that Greg has worded it here. So his question is: our minor needs to focus on goaltender development. I'm pretty sure that this is supposed to say our minor hockey association needs to focus on goaltender development, and one of the biggest hurdles is getting head coaches to buy into proper goaltending development at practice, coupled with having volunteer coaches to work with the goalies during said practice. What would you do to get the coaches on board and increase volunteers to act as goalie coaches? So Nathan, I'll let you answer this question here first, and I'll submit my thoughts afterwards.
Yeah, so this is probably the number one struggle. And I know we talked about it when we were talking about the Hockey Canada kind of issues, I guess, when it comes to goalie development. Um, I think the biggest change that needs to happen is at the coach level, right? Because we need more people that have at least a base knowledge of goaltending that are around these goalies all the time, like in practices and all that stuff, because there's not enough people that are super knowledgeable about goaltending that we can be out with every single team, unfortunately. So the shift does need to happen at the coach level, and we've talked about that. And I think basically the best way to try and get some buy-in is to just start the conversation. Just kind of put it out there. Ask to maybe have a meeting with the coaches, or whoever can be involved and to help. And sometimes you can even go a little higher up in the organization and say, hey, I've got access to X resource that can help our coaches throughout the organization kind of learn a little bit more about goaltending. And it is on my off-season hit list to put together that coaching like course that we talked about a couple months ago, that I gave myself a year deadline. But what we do have, and we'll link this up in the show notes, but we do have that handbook, that coach's handbook, that I took the price off of it so you can get it totally for free. And basically, it's just that starting point of having a conversation and being able to give coaches the knowledge, because the number one thing or problem, I guess, is these coaches have no clue when it comes to goaltending. So being able to have a conversation and say, hey, you guys know so much about the players, you guys develop these players all the time, but the problem is our goalies aren't getting the development, and we put so much pressure on the goalies to basically win a game for us or lose a game for us, right? It's one of the most important positions in sport, and we don't have enough development around it. So come at it from that angle and just be like, you know, we want, obviously, for the team to succeed, we want everybody to develop, and that should be everybody's goal when it comes to minor hockey, is development and fun. And you can't do that if you're picking and choosing positions or players or whatever on the team to get that development. So if you can have that conversation to be like, we need our goalies, they're an important part of our team, we need them to be getting proper development. And if you come at them with, hey, here's a handbook I found online from, this podcast that I listened to, it outlines how you can run a goalie friendly practice, it outlines some of the basics of goaltending to look for. Would you just be willing to read through this and just think about it and start implementing some of these things? And then the other thing is too, is when it comes to getting more volunteers on board, honestly, and this is when it probably already happening, but honestly, start with the goalie parents first, because they're probably the ones most willing to go out and help improve the goalie situation, because it's in their best interest. Like, everybody wants their kids to get better. You can also maybe talk to your goalie director in your association and ask if they have any resources or any tips or anything like that, and if they can facilitate some of these conversations, to be able to be like, hey, can we distribute this handbook to our coaches, or hey, can we have a presentation about what we can do for our goalies with all the coaches in our organization, or whatever the case is, right? But just starting that conversation and putting it out there that, hey, I've found some resources, whether they're YouTube videos or our handbook or whatever, some articles you find. Just be like, I found these resources that are great for head coaches to get a start when it comes to being able to help their goalies. Can we start this conversation? Can we start implementing some of this stuff and kind of go from there, right? And unfortunately, at the end of the day, if you don't get buy-in, it is like, we can't really control what other people do, and that's the unfortunate part of it. But you don't know that until you start the conversation. And if you really don't get any buy-in, you can maybe escalate, talk to the organization, like some of the higher ups, and go from there. And then if you're really getting pushback or anything like that, unfortunately, there's not much we can do, but you can at least say we tried and all of that stuff. But I think for the most part, the majority of personnel out there are interested in giving a better environment for their goalies to develop. So I think overall you should have a pretty good response to it if you come at it like, hey, I think we need a little bit more. Here's some resources that I found. Can we try and implement some of this stuff? So
Yeah. I have a few thoughts running in my head, so I'm going to try and control these as best as I can. Um, I suppose like the first thing to do now is there's no reason not to learn about goaltending.
yeah.
And what I mean by that is like again, like if you're gonna be the head, like I did when I did my solo episode about running a goalie friendly practice, the biggest point that I was reinforcing over and over and over again is that it's the head coach's job to develop all aspects of the team, the forwards, the defense, the power play, the penalty kill, and the goaltending. Um, so it's kind of not an excuse for me at this point for a head coach to come up to me and say, I don't know anything about goaltending. Okay, fair, but have you actually done any research? Have you gone online and just looked up goalie drills? Have you gone to the DIY goalie and downloaded the free handbook? Um, there are a lot of resources online, and so there's no reason for head coaches to say nowadays, I don't know anything about goaltending. Because if you just take a few moments to just look online, you'll have the basics in maybe a week or so. I don't know. I'm just speculating. Um, but again, with that being said, like Nathan was right, not all coaches are going to be like that, which is unfortunate, and not all coaches are really going to care, which is also the unfortunate part. Again, we can't control what the head coaches do essentially, so getting them to buy into proper goaltending development, would have to start at the goalie parents, because they're the ones that are paying for their kids to be on the team and paying for the development and everything of the sort. But I would also, in my perfect world, on top of all the coaches um, buying into the program, or at least taking the time to look into goaltending development, I would say, like for me, I would say it's got to be on the organization itself, right? I mean, like they put out like the goalie weekly clinics on where they hire the goalie company to do whatever it is that they're doing, but there's no otherwise, like there's no actual goaltending resources beyond that, right? Other than Hockey Canada, Hockey Alberta, which is a problem in itself. I'm basing this question as if it was from Alberta and Canada. Um, but in terms of getting an increase in volunteer coaches, again, in my perfect world where every coach, or at least there has to be at least one coach on the team that is goaltender that has the goaltending certificate. Every like same thing as here in Edmonton, where there's the respect in sport, where I would say it almost have to be something similar, is that there always has to be one designated coach on the team that is willing to take the level 1 goaltender development course that maybe the provincial association puts on, and that would be the guy that would be responsible for the goaltending development on the team. Um, Again, goalie parents is always a great start, because 90% and 99% of the time that parent has played goal themselves, mind you, probably back in the 80s or 90s, but still. Um, but that's where you're going to get a lot of your volunteers from. I was thinking about it as well, as that, if you have like I would say, like even getting goalies from within the organization that are playing at the U18, U21, U whatever level, and great volunteer opportunities for those young kids to come out and teach the next generation. So I guess like, yeah, so like that would be kind of my answer to this question, is like, in order to get more coaches on board and increase the volunteers, is that like, I would say it has to be on the association to almost mandate um having one designated coach per team to be to have or to take the level 1 goaltending curriculum, one of a level 1 goaltending course or whatever it is that you want to call it. Again, like I said, like there's no reason for somebody to there's no reason for coaches to say nowadays, oh, I don't know anything about goaltending, because there are 1,000
Yeah.
resources out there. There are coaches such as Nathan and myself that are out there that are always willing to share that knowledge. It's just nobody from that side of things is willing to start the conversation. So it has to start somewhere, and maybe that is with the goalie parents or somebody that is advocating for the goalies on your team.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing. That's why we're getting this question, is because the associations aren't doing this, whether it's the
Exactly.
local, the provincial, the national, at least here in Canada or in Alberta or whatever. I know it could very well be different for you guys listening in the States, could be very well different for you guys listening over in Sweden. But um, when it comes to us specifically, because we can talk on our personal experience with Canadian associations, and that that's a bigger issue in itself. I mean, we had a whole episode on it and probably have 4 more on it, but when when you guys so when you guys are trying to take the onus on yourself, maybe it is time to start some sort of movement or petition or whatever you want to call it, where maybe this is something that we need to start raising as a group, as a community, to some of these higher level organizations to push for better, development, better resources, better coach resources, right? Like, because I'm fully on board with you that the biggest change is going to happen at the coaching level, because you can teach a coach, even if they've never played goalie, you can teach a coach to look for goalies having their hands in front, and you can teach a coach
Mm-hmm.
to look for goalies tracking a puck. And honestly, if one coach per team knows those two things, that would go an insanely far way to increase our goalies' development. Just those two things alone. And those are easy enough that anyone with a little bit of kind of training can pick up really easily, especially at the younger levels, because it's really easy to see a 10-year-old if they're tracking the puck or not, or if they're making their
Mm-hmm.
saves in front of their body or not. It's super easy. Um,
Yeah.
so to me, like, it's just a distribution thing. And not only a distribution thing, but almost a forcing thing. Like, not that that sounds right, but telling the coaches or the teams or organizations or whatever that this is a mandate. You need to take this. They do that, like you said, with the respect in sport. That's a mandate. So why can't you add one more half-hour video course? Because that's really all it'd be, is half an hour, maybe an hour if you want to also add
Right.
things like how to run a goalie friendly practice and blah blah blah. But it to me, it's maybe that's the answer, is maybe we need to band together a bunch of people, a big community, and sign a petition and go storm the Hockey Alberta doorsteps or the Hockey Canada doorsteps and just be like, hey, we're here, we're picketing, we want more goalie development.
If there's ever
So
time for another trucker convoy, this would be.
yeah, everybody get in their trucks and goalie pads, trucks and goalie pads, let's go. But yeah, in all seriousness, I think for what you can do as a goalie parent that's unhappy with your situation, start the conversation for your specific, you know, team, your specific coaching staff. And you can also offer to be the volunteer to start. And the other thing is if you're really unhappy with how your organization is doing things, maybe you can put your name in the ring for being the goalie director for your organization, and then you can start really making some positive change. Now, yes, you still have to go through the board of your organization, but we are slowly trending in the right direction with goalie development. So most people on these boards now are a little bit more on board with these things. So, you know, you might have to take a little bit more onus on yourself to be the change you want to see, which, I mean, shouldn't have to be that way, but that might be the starting point, right? Is maybe I'm the goalie director now and this is the changes I want to make. And it might take a couple years to really get full buy-in, and you can go small steps at a time. Not ideal, but it is what it is, right? But I think it all starts with the conversation. So sit your coaches down, sit your organization down, your goalie directors or whatever, and say, hey, here's some resources. Here's some things I'd like to see differently, because our goalies are part of the team too, and they're a very important part of the team. So they need to be getting the proper development.
Yeah. Yeah, we could do like a whole hour on this. Excuse me.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, I don't know. It's been something that's been around since Nathan and I were playing. And I think now with there being such a goaltending shortage in North America, specifically in Canada, now there's starting to become that recognition of that goaltenders have been left to the wolves for so long that the populace has dwindled to almost nothing. Um, yeah, I mean, you kind of almost have to be that parent in a sense where you kind of almost have to, not condoning it, but you kind of almost have to make a little bit of a stink about, you
The
know,
squeaky wheel gets the grease.
yeah, exactly. Like being this, you kind of have to be that guy, in order to push for that change. Um, there's That's kind of the gist of it right there. So Greg, I hope that kind of answers your question. Thank you very much for submitting. If you want to submit a question to the podcast, for Greg gets the honorary gold star. He gets honorary first star, and that'll also now be in the trivia questions. Who was the first DIY goalie podcast listener? But if you want to submit a question to us, you
I'm
can
sure
reach
that's
out
a
to us
popular
info at
trivia question.
you can reach out to us at info@thediygoalie.com, or you can head over to the DIYgoalie.com. There we do have a form set up for listeners to submit questions. Nathan,
Yeah.
your subject?
So I wanted to touch on something that's not necessarily goalie related, but I think it can be translated to goaltending. For those of you that might not know, this is kind of a concept from Tim Ferriss, and Tim Ferriss is kind of like a high-end entrepreneur influencer. He wrote The 4 Hour Work Week, which was what he's probably most famous for, but he has a bunch of other stuff like books and courses, and I think he's got a podcast too and all that. But one of the things that he promotes, I guess, or one of his concepts is what he calls fear setting. So almost similar to goal setting, but it's using kind of the worst case scenario to try and get over your fears about something. So he relates it more so to business, like getting over the fear of quitting your job when you're diving into your business, blah blah blah, stuff like that. But I think it applies well to goaltending too, because a lot of times when we are getting ready for a game or anything like that, nerves come into play. And because the game's so mental, like the mental part of the game is such a big aspect of the game. Um, it can be make or break. So if we are not confident, if we are second guessing ourselves, doubting ourselves, anything like that, that could derail us real quick. And kind of like Luke Lush was saying a couple episodes ago about, the drop in the bucket, right? Like every hour that he's worked on goaltending is another drop in his goaltending bucket. And day to day, how full that bucket is pretty much the exact same. We haven't forgotten how to play goal. We haven't forgotten how to stop a puck, but the big difference usually is our mindset and how we're approaching the game mentally, right? So I wanted to bring this concept of fear setting over to the goalie side of things. And I think it can really help to calm some nerves and to really shift that mindset away from the negative thoughts. So basically, the concept is that what you're worried about, write down the worst case scenario. So basically, before a game, for example, you could write down the worst case scenario as being, I don't know, I let in 4 goals on the first 4 shots and I get pulled or whatever, right? Because normally, a lot of times, that's kind of where goalies are struggling, with the mental side of things, is they're worried about letting somebody down, right? They're worried about letting in a bunch of goals, getting pulled, and then, their coach is disappointed in them, their mom or dad's disappointed in them, they're disappointed in themselves, right? But if you take that situation and you say, okay, so if I do let in 4 of the first 4 shots, what's the worst possible outcome? Okay, well, worst possible outcome, you're probably getting pulled. You're going to the bench. More often than not, most of our situations are we're we're there the next day. We're getting to live another day. We're getting to go to practice the next day or the game the next day or whatever the case is. So realistically, was it that bad? I mean, that's kind of the premise of this exercise, is to sit down and be like, okay, what am I scared of? What's the worst case scenario? And then you can kind of really look at it and be like, okay, you know what? That's really not that bad. Like, I'm not dying, right? Or I'm not like, you know, that's not going to be
That's
the
extreme.
last.
Holy wow.
Well, well, I know, right? But, like I'm also not losing my spot on this team because of this one game or whatever the case is, right? I mean, as Oilers fans, they go back to Mikko Koskinen a couple of years ago, and he let in 4 shots on the first, or 4 goals on the first 4 shots against Vancouver. He still played another like year and a half for the Oilers, and as much as he gets a lot of flack from Oilers fans, he did have decent-ish numbers through his career with the Oilers, right? So, um, when you really sit back and you really think about what you're actually worried about, a lot of times it's like, oh, why am I this nervous or this worried about what's going to happen, right? And so I challenge you guys to have that exercise a little bit and to be like, okay, do I need to be as worried as I actually am for my game? Cuz honestly, you don't. And again, you haven't forgotten how to stop a puck. So get out of your own head and just go and do it. So that's kind of what I have for that.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept. And again, I think about kind of almost in a way back to Pete Fry with the um what was it, like the goalie career path plan
Yeah, the
thing?
map, the
The
map out your
goalie
goalie
map.
career.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Um and so I think subsequently to that would have to be kind of the concept that you're bringing up, right? When it comes to, well, if I don't, my path is that I want to start in Edmonton minor hockey, and then I want to go and play with Southside Athletic Club, and then I want to be able to get drafted by the Edmonton Oil Kings, and then go on to play for the Edmonton Oilers or whatever. Um, Kind of almost in a way like you need backup plans for your backup plans, right? So if I, well, what if I don't make double A? What if I don't make the triple A team in my first go around? Okay, well then what's the next step? You know, well, what if I don't get drafted by the Edmonton Oil Kings in the WHL? Okay, well then you still have options for the AJHL or playing in any of the other junior leagues within the country of Canada. Um, so in terms of fear setting, yeah. So like, hey, you're going up in a big game. It's playoff championship game. What are the worst possible scenarios, and are you prepared for them? Essentially, right? So it's an interesting concept, some that I might have to look into after this pod. But I just that's like the first thing that I think of. It's like I take it back to Pete Fry's goalie map and just kind of having backup plans for your backup plans. And I'm just looking at the grand scheme of things. I'm not looking at like one game at a time, right? So
Yeah. And just building off of that, because that's another part of the Tim Ferriss like fear setting thing, is that it also offers you an opportunity to plan for that worst case scenario, right? So basically, you can write down like, this is what I'm worried about, this is the worst case scenario, but you can take that a step further at that point and be like, okay, so if this actually does happen, what's my reaction, what do I do? And you can lay out whatever you need to lay out, like a reset routine, like, okay, what can I do to mentally get myself back into the right mindset? What can I do at practice to start, just honing back in on the fundamentals that are so key to my game, right? Like the tracking, the save execution, the skating, all of that stuff, right? So not only do we usually kind of like, when we write down this worst case scenario, not only do we usually be like, oh, you know what, it's actually not that bad, I shouldn't be that worried about it, but it also offers you an opportunity to look at it and be like, okay, well, if it does happen, if the worst case scenario does happen, what is my plan and how can I deal with it and all that stuff, right? Because 98% of the time, the worst case scenario doesn't happen, probably even more than that, right? But the odd time it does. And it just offers you an opportunity to prepare for it better and help you kind of rebound a little bit better, right? So if you do have a terrible game, like you play your worst game of your career, everybody's going to do that at one point. So if that happens, what do you do? What do you need to do to get back in the right state of mind and get back to stopping the puck like you know how? Because the longer you drag out that slump, and we've kind of talked about this before, but the longer you drag that out, the kind of worse it can get. So if you can have a plan to bounce back a little quicker, then it's just business as usual and you can kind of carry on. So that's kind of the two, I guess, main reasons why I think this is a good exercise for goalies to do at some point, especially if you're coming up to something you're really worried and nervous about. I think it kind of just helps put things into perspective, because a lot of times, and this goes with life in general and goaltending, but a lot of times we tend to, you know, over amplify the actual issues, right? Like, in the end of the day, if you lose the playoff championship, it sucks. But it really isn't the end of the world. Things go on. You're still going to be playing hockey, all that stuff, right? So you just got to put things into perspective and kind of be able to, go from there, have a little bit of a plan, and just don't worry about it. It's not as big of a deal as you think it is. Don't worry about it.
there was I was listening to an interview with a podcast of one of my buddies that was doing, and the coach that they had interviewed, um, kind of just to reiterate your point there, is that realistically, at the end of the day, if you lose 6-0 and you got pulled on the first 3 shots or whatever, or the types of goals that you gave in were just really, really bad goals, nobody's going to remember in like 3 days. They're going to move on. The team's going to move on. You're still going to have your spot on the team. As long as you know, as the athlete, it's that you cannot have another game like that. So you have to do your adjustments to get better, to prevent what happened in that game to not happen again, essentially. And so, kind of almost in a way, like even when you're playing the games, like goalies kind of have to have short term memories, right? You give up a bad goal, it should have been an easy stick save, and it ended up going right through your 5-hole because your stick was out of position. Okay, you learn from it. You know that you need to have your stick in the next position. Move on to the next shot. You have to focus on that next step forward, moving on to that next shot, and even then, beyond that, moving on to the next game. Beyond that, moving on to the next team in the next season, whatever else, right? So, yeah, just goalies just have to have short term memories, right? And so, like you were saying, just we do tend to, and I think that's kind of the fault of goaltending at the same time is we tend to over amplify things. We tend to over examine everything. Sometimes a good shot is just a good shot. Sometimes a bad save is just a bad save. As long as you recognize that, yeah, it was a good shot, and then you do your best to try and stop that shot next time, however you can. Or yeah, I gave up a bad goal, did everything that I thought I did right. Obviously, I didn't. We move on to the next one, and we leave it at that. Maybe with a little bit of examination in there somewhere, but beyond that, it is what it is. You move on. You move on to the next step. You move on to the next shot, and you go at it from there.
Yeah. So the last point I want to make about this is, you know, I guess going beyond just the one game. So if you do get to a situation where maybe you've been struggling for a while and say you do lose a spot on a team that you really want to be on or whatever the case is, right? And maybe that is your worst case scenario where you lose the spot that you have. And it does happen, especially at the higher levels, right? Not so much at minor hockey, but when you start getting into like the junior and semi pro and college and whatever, that is a real legitimate possibility, right? That is a thing. So again, being able to plan ahead of time with that fear setting and just say, okay, if this does happen, my worst case scenario is I lose my spot on this team. What's my plan to try and get back, right? I mean, because it's happened to a lot of goalies, a lot of athletes, a lot of players where you actually get knocked down a level or two or whatever while you're trying to, find your footing at a step up or whatever it is, right? And you just got to do what you can to improve yourself, learn from those mistakes, and get into a better state of mind, work on the things you need to do so you can get back to that level you were at. Because just as a personal example, and I've said this before, but my 17-year-old year, junior A, was not a good year. I did not have good numbers. I did not play very well. I got traded from that team and I was still at the same level, but I basically lost my spot on the team I was on. But I used that opportunity to, implement the things I learned before the year before and, start carving out a piece of my pie, I guess, in that league, and ended up having 3 solid seasons after my first year. And yeah, so that's another thing too, right? Is you can also map out like a longer kind of worst case scenario. And again, when you really look at it, it's like, okay, you know what? This isn't actually that bad. And now I can kind of plan for, having a fallback and giving yourself like a development plan, like a personal development plan to get back on track and to start again, kind of getting up the ranks, right? And after you've been knocked down a little bit. So at the end of the day, it's not as bad as we think it is. You guys will be okay. Don't be so nervous. Have fun with it. That's the big thing. Hockey's for fun. Have some fun with it. Enjoy the moment. Relish what you're doing and just run with it.
Speaking of hockey having fun, and I'm kind of surprising this on you. and I don't mean to, but I was thinking about it, and I did want to address it. I wanted to talk briefly about before. We're done with the segment? Did we kind of milk the
Yeah,
cow
unless
dry?
you got anything else to.
No, I got nothing else for that. Like I said, it's probably going to be something that might have to get you to send me a link for, and I'll have to look into it after this podcast. Um, but there is one thing that I wanted to bring up quickly before we sign off for the day, because I think it's important, and I think having a voice in the goalie community gives us an opportunity to talk about it. I'm not going to name drop anything. I'm not going to. I'm going to try to be respectful of the situation here, but there was an incident recently out in Ontario involving a minor hockey team and the goalie that was on that minor hockey team. Um, Long story short is that the players ended up having a group chat, and the name of the group chat was less than friendly. And then the content within that group chat was also less than stellar. Um, this is a form of bullying. This is a form of abuse, and at the fact that the minor hockey organization failed to do anything, the local police had failed to do anything, the head coaches had failed to do anything, and the parents of these individuals had failed to do anything, still speaks volumes of kind of where hockey culture is at in this country, essentially. So thankfully, that goalie did manage to get out of this situation and is now on a better team. And I think for him, best case scenario, for his own mental health and for his own safety, as well as for that minor hockey organization, really needs to take a step back and go, what happened? How can we be better? Especially since there's still the overhanging thread of the 2018 World Juniors. I'm not saying it's up to that effect, but still, like, the fact that this has all been happening back to back to back with the Kyle Beats situation in Chicago, the Hockey Canada 2018 World Juniors scandal that's going to be set for trial in later this year. And then now this is just another examples of, to be quite frank, the type of BS that still is happening in the sport. I love this sport and I want everybody to do well at it, but for what happened to that young man, not okay by all accounts, and shame on the organization, shame on the kids for doing that. It's not funny by any means. They're not being funny, and so really needs a hard look there. So I just, to that individual, if they do ever happen to be listening, um, we here at the DIY Goalie and subsequently True North Goaltending, along with the rest of the goalie union, do stand with you, and we're glad that you are on a better team and in a better place now. So I just wanted to get that out there before we kind of sign off for the day.
Yeah, I the hockey community can do so many wonderful things, and yet things like this still happen. I do think overall the general culture has gotten better, but there's still a long way to go. And I think a lot of the problem, and this kind of stems, like, this kind of goes a little outside of hockey as well, but it seems like there's just such a lack of accountability when
Yeah,
it comes to a lot of things these days. Like, if you think about it, like in school, in hockey, not with this situation, but in other situations, like a lot of these quote unquote people in power, you think of like teachers, principals, coaches, whatever, a lot of them don't really have the power to really implement any discipline anymore. And obviously, I'm not saying like we need to go back to hitting kids' knuckles with
yeah,
rulers or anything like that, but
yeah,
like, but there's still, I don't know, it almost seems like if there's no discipline or accountability at home, these kids can't get it anywhere else, right? And I don't know. I don't want to get on a whole rant here, but
no,
it's just one of those things that, we did talk about it a couple episodes ago about being a pro, right? And acting like a pro.
yeah,
And that's what it comes down to. If you guys find yourselves in these situations where you're playing high level hockey, like, be a good person first and then be a good athlete. And not only is that going to, you know, help with your hockey career, but it's just going to help in life in general, right? And it still baffles me that people think this is okay. Like, I think we've all done things at one point in our life that we haven't been exactly proud of, but you can still, like, most of us can still say that it hasn't involved any sort of like crazy like, death
Yeah,
threats or whatever, like stuff like that, right? So, like, be smart, be compassionate, be a good human. And
yeah,
that's how the culture is going to change. And like I said, overall it has gotten better, but there's still a long way to go. And if you're not part of the problem, be part of the solution. Like, I think being quiet about things is just as bad as being involved with things.
right.
So, if you see something, tell
Say
somebody, I
something.
guess. Yeah,
Yeah,
see something, say something. And also, like, I think we do need to have a better system in place for when these things come up as well, right? So that it can be nipped in the bud initially and things don't escalate. Because there's actually another story about one of my former junior A clubs that I played for that had a coach that wasn't there when I was there. Like, this was after the fact, but there was kind of some shady stuff going on between him and a player, and it was brought up early in the season, and it kind of got dismissed. And then it escalated from there. And then finally, halfway through the season, it kind of got addressed. But then the story was that this coach had been flagged back in like early 2000s with the minor hockey association. And so 20 years later is still coaching at a junior A level and had some shady stuff going on with a junior player. So you got to think of, like, well, what happened in those 20 years, like, that never got said.
yeah,
You know what I mean? And so this is the stuff, like, there needs to be more like accountability and discipline. And then we also need to make sure that we're advocating for these things that happen. Like, we're saying stuff and we're pushing for some sort of action, right? But
yeah.
I don't know, be part of the
It
solution.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, there's like 1,000 different problems in hockey, goaltending amongst one of them. Um, but yeah, but I think for people like us who have a platform the way that we do, if we're able to address, I mean, like, and thank God for social media as well. If people don't realize or need to start realizing again, rather, that what you put on social media is out there forever. And even if it's not you putting it out on social media, it could be somebody else, like some like this, like the hockey parent. I think, like, because I think it was the hockey parent who had called it out, um whose kid was involved in these activities and had put it all over the Facebook, and it garnered a huge amount of traction very, very quickly, which is ended up to the point where this goaltender ended up moving to a different team, and the minor hockey association actually started acting like adults and addressing it. um but yeah, like, if you see something, say something. Obviously, we're not all going to be perfect. Bullying realistically is never ever going to go away. But if we do what we can to mitigate it and to speak up rather than staying quiet, it goes a long way. Even if the results aren't desired, as long as you did, whoever you are, as long as you did your part, and to say, like, hey, Johnny, that's not okay what you're doing, saying that you're going to do something to your teammate who is also our friend. Smarten up, essentially, right? Again, we talked about being a pro and all that, so you guys
Yeah.
can go back and listen to that episode. But it's
Yeah. We'll
we'll
link
link
it
that
in
in
the
the show
show
notes.
notes. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, there needs to, like, I think everyone, like, honestly, we all need a refresher on how to be human beings, because I feel like after especially after COVID, we kind of all just went wily and
Yeah.
and forgotten to do all that. But no,
Yeah.
I
Well,
wanted
and
to.
that's
Go ahead. Go
uh,
ahead. Sorry.
yeah, just one quick thing. Like, if you get called out because you're doing something that somebody doesn't like, own
Don't be a
up to
baby.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
own up to it and say, "Oh, okay, like my bad, sorry," and change or
Yeah.
do better.
Yeah.
Be better.
I'm a full believer that everybody in this world is a good person. Obviously, not all the case, but I don't believe that anybody is actually truly mean or anybody's actually truly evil. Again, to be desired. But sometimes we're all going to do stupid things, and the fact that there are people out there that believe that it's okay or boys will be boys or whatever, yeah, to a certain extent, and then it gets to borderline WTF essentially. But yeah, I wanted to address it because I think it's important for people like us who have that platform to address it and to be part of that conversation, part of the goalie community, to say, hey, we got your back, bud. Don't worry about it, and go at it from there. Well,
And
yeah,
everybody else be better.
yeah, exactly. Nathan, be better.
Always trying.
Anyways, but yeah, we'll cap it off here for today's pod. Yeah, this was this was an interesting one, to say the least, today. First off, again, thank you to Greg Marion for submitting his question. If you guys have any questions that you would like answered on the podcast, feel free to reach out to us, info@thediygoalie.com, or you can head over to our website and submit a listener question that way. Again, Greg Marion will forever be part of that trivia question now for whoever submitted the first listener question on the podcast. Feel free to follow us on all the social media platforms at the DIY Goalie. If you are watching on the YouTube side of things, first off, thank you very much for watching. Secondly, make sure you hit that subscribe button, the like button, the share button, all that fun stuff. And if you are a new viewer, again, same deal. Hit the subscribe button, the like button, the share button, all that stuff. It helps the algorithm, gets us discovered, and we can put goaltending on the map again. If you are a new listener or returning listener to any of your favorite podcast platforms, Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, first off, thank you for listening. Much appreciated. Again, same deal. Make sure you hit that follow button to be notified for every upload that we put out on the pod, as well as share it with any of your goaltending friends, even if you're non-goaltending friends. And we want to bring out the knowledge of goaltending out there, and doing this podcast for us is the best way to do that. And the more that we can get people thinking about goaltending, obviously the better. Beyond that, if you do happen to be in the Edmonton area and want to work with myself or Nathan or any of our amazing staff members, you can go visit us, truenorthgoaltending.com. We do have a bunch of promotions happening right now, where we do have where we're just, by the time this goes out, we will have just wrapped up our open house sessions. So we will chat about that probably next podcast. We also have our summer camps, like a 3-day summer camp, 4-day summer camp happening in late July, and then a 5-day summer camp happening in early weeks of August, which will be very, very exciting. I'm looking forward to going back to that. Unfortunately, won't be at the July one due to external reasons. We are also running a promotion with the DIY, not the DIY goalie, with True North Goaltending right now, where we are offering newer goalies to have the ability to come train with us and just kind of learn the ins and outs of goaltending. That will be the first year goalie pricing at our Niski facility for $115.50. So if you are interested in your first year, kind of getting some private one-on-one time, because ice is tough to come by, and especially for newer goalies, development is even harder to come by. Feel free to go check us out at True North Goaltending there as well. In terms of our social media presence with True North Goaltending, again, same deal. You can find us across all your favorite social media platforms, True North Goaltending, except for Instagram, because we like to be different. You can follow us there at YEG Goalie Coach. Nathan, as always, a pleasure. Enjoyed it. Any final thoughts?
No, I'll let you sign off. I almost took it, but no, I'm not.
Make some saves, goalies. We'll see you guys next time.